All right, let me record this. All right, C12, H22, O11. All right, so that is sugar. Now I chose this because it's got a lot of components to this. All right, so carbon, right? How much carbon is in sugar? 12. So you're saying that there's 12 carbons, right, for every one sugar. Okay? And we could do that for each one. Hydrogen. How many hydrogens are there in a sugar? 22. All right? For every one. All right? And then oxygen, of course, would be 11 for every sugar. So if I had 2 sugars, how much oxygen would I have? 22, because there's 11 for every one. All right? So we're going to use this. Basically, we're going to use the formula, all right, so we can figure out how much of the parts that make up this whole thing. All right? So looking at, let's say I had 3.20 moles of sugar. Okay. We can figure out how many atoms of, let's go with oxygen, are in it. All right? So let's say we have 3.20 moles of sugar. We can figure out how many atoms of oxygen are in that 3.2 moles, all right, by using the formula. See the formula? All right? So what I do is I would start with 3.20 moles of sugar. Okay? Now, how much oxygen are in sugar anyways? There's 11 of them. There's 11 oxygens for every one sugar. So we can say that there are 11, and in this case, moles of oxygen in 1 mole of sugar. Okay? Because there's 11 for every one. All right? And if I were to solve this right now, I would have moles of oxygen. I want atoms of oxygen. So let's change our moles to atoms. Moles on bottom, atoms on top. How many moles? 1. Just 1 mole. And how many atoms are in 1 mole? 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. Okay? Now, if you said 11 moles, well then you'd have to figure out how many atoms are in 11 moles, which that's just too much calculation. So we'll just go with 1 mole. All right? So here, right here, is what we're using the formula. See, there are 11 moles for every 1 mole. We got that from the formula. Just multiplied it by 11, because there's 11 for every one. All right? So you end up getting 2.12 times 10 to the 25th, I believe, atoms of oxygen. Okay? So that's how many atoms of oxygen you have that's in the 3.2 moles of sugar. All right. Let's look at a different one. Okay, we can actually have, let's say I had 125 grams of sugar. I have 125 grams of sugar. All right. You should be able to calculate the number of grams of carbon in there. Okay, again, we're trying to find out how many grams of this 125 grams is carbon. So we got 125 grams of sugar. It contains carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So we're trying to figure out what part of that is just carbon. You see what we're doing here? Okay? So first off, all right, if we look at carbon, how many carbons are in sugar? 12. Now, is that 12 grams? No. That doesn't make any sense. 12 grams of carbon in 1 gram of sugar? That doesn't even make any sense, right? But we can't say 12 moles of carbon for every 1 mole of sugar, right? So what do you think we're going to change our grams to then? Moles. So we're going to take our 125 grams and let's change it to moles. Now this is of sugar. So we're going to change that to grams to moles. How many moles? 1. And grams, I've already calculated it out. It's going to be 342. There's 342 grams. That's the molar mass of C12H22 over 11. And now we've got moles. Okay? Now, from the formula, all right, moles of sugar, moles of carbon, from the formula, we know that there's 12 moles of carbon for every 1 mole of sugar, right? And this will give us moles of carbon. We can then change it to grams of carbon. And the grams of carbon according to the periodic table, 12, right. All right, and we end up with multiply across, divide by the bottom. Should get 52.6 grams of carbon. Again, we got there because we looked at the formula and realized that there is 12 moles of carbon in it. Right? So we figured out how many moles of sugar there is, then we multiplied by 12, because there's 12 for every one, and then change it to mass. All right. Any questions so far? All right, last one, if I can fit this in here. All right. How much sugar, and we're going to say that, let's say grams, in grams. So how much grams of sugar, okay, is needed for, let's say, 3.15 moles of carbon. We'll just stay with carbon. Okay? So I want 3.15 moles of carbon, and I'm going to get this from the sugar, so I got to figure out how much sugar I need to mass out. So how much sugar in grams is needed for 3.5 moles of carbon? All right. So we're going to start with what's given here, 3.15 moles of carbon, okay? And what is the relationship between carbon and sugar? Right, 12 moles of carbon and 1 mole of sugar. All right, so we know that there's 12 moles of carbon in 1 mole of sugar. I already have moles, right? So I already have moles, so I don't have to convert to moles. So I just go ahead and use this, set moles of carbon to moles of sugar. And there are 12 moles of carbon for every 1 mole of sugar. This will give me moles of sugar. And I just need grams of sugar. So 1 mole of sugar is equal to 342 grams. And I can just figure out how many grams of sugar that is. What is it? 89.8 grams of sugar. Okay, so again, I kind of went backwards this time. I knew how much I needed. I just want to know how much of the sugar I needed. Or I knew how many grams of the parts, or the moles of the parts. I just figured grams of the total. All right, does anyone have any questions on that? You see how we're using this part now? This is the new thing here. Using the formula to get this kind of a ratio almost of how many parts are in it. Any questions? Nope. Okay.